Welcome back, students. Today we are going to discuss a horror story, a chilling tale of crossing an invisible line in the dirt and suddenly owing your entire life savings to a telecommunications company. I am talking, of course, about the dark ages of mobile roaming charges. If you traveled in Europe before 2017, you remember the sheer panic of packing your bags and realizing you had to turn your phone into a useless, expensive brick. Imagine Fifi, a tourist from Berlin visiting Paris for the weekend. She steps off the train, turns on her phone to check a map for exactly 3 minutes, and unwittingly incurs a data bill large enough to buy a small yacht. This was not an accident. This was the highly lucrative, carefully guarded business model of European telecom operators. For decades, they enjoyed a system where crossing a border gave them the ultimate excuse to legally empty your pockets. To understand why this was legal highway robbery, we must look at how roaming actually works. When you leave your home country, your local operator has no cell towers in the new country. They have to rent tower access from a foreign network. This rental agreement is called the wholesale roaming market. The foreign network charges your home network a wholesale fee for connecting your calls. Naturally, the home network passes this cost on to you, the consumer. But here is the beautiful catch. The wholesale prices were artificially inflated by a silent gentleman's agreement among national monopolies. They all charged each other astronomical fees, knowing they could safely pass the misery directly to the travelers. The result was consumer paralysis. People simply stopped using their phones abroad. It was called roaming fear. A continent that prided itself on the free movement of goods, services, and people was utterly failing at the free movement of a simple text message. Enter the European Commission. The EU hates friction in the single market almost as much as I hate cheap synthetic yarn. A borderless Europe simply cannot exist if an invisible digital wall goes up the moment you cross the Rhine. In the mid-2000s, the EU decided to bring down the hammer. But dismantling a multi-billion-euro cash cow fiercely protected by national telecom giants is not a job for the faint of heart. It requires the most terrifying weapon in the world: unrelenting, meticulously drafted bureaucracy. The European Commission began what would become a 10-year war of attrition against the telecom industry, armed with price caps, regulatory warnings, and a frankly absurd amount of coffee. The first strike came in 2007. The EU introduced the Euro tariff. For the first time in history, the EU legally capped the maximum price operators could charge customers for making and receiving phone calls while traveling abroad. Consumers rejoiced. Suddenly, calling your mother from Rome to tell her you were eating pasta did not cost the equivalent of the pasta itself. But the telecom companies were not going to surrender their golden goose so easily. As voice calls became cheaper, the telecom industry found a new, even more lucrative trap. The late 2000s brought the dawn of the smartphone era. The internet was suddenly in our pockets, and data was entirely unregulated. Data roaming became the Wild West. Downloading a single email attachment in another country could cost you €5. Streaming a video was financial suicide. The telecom industry was raking in record profits all over again. The market was completely broken. Operators argued that building networks was expensive, and they needed these roaming fees to survive. The EU pointed out that the markup on data was often 10,000% above actual cost. So the bureaucrats went back to work. In 2012, the EU introduced strict price caps on retail data roaming. Year by year, they forced the maximum price per megabyte lower and lower, tightening the noose around the monopolies. The telecommunications lobby fought back fiercely. They warned of doomsday scenarios. They claimed that if roaming charges were abolished, domestic phone bills would skyrocket to compensate, and network infrastructure would collapse into dust. Spoiler alert, none of that happened. The European Commission simply ignored their weeping and gnashing of teeth. The political will was too strong. Abolishing roaming was the most highly visible, easily understood benefit the EU could offer its citizens. Finally, after a decade of legal battles, the killing blow was struck. In 2017, the European Union officially launched the Roam Like at Home initiative. The concept was breathtakingly simple. Whatever tariff you pay in your home country, you pay exactly the same across all 27 member states. No extra charges for calls, no extra charges for texts, and no extra charges for data. The digital border was erased. But remember our core tenet of this class. The European Union never makes anything completely simple without adding a layer of glorious, necessary complexity behind the scenes. Because if it were completely unregulated, there would be a massive loophole. A citizen living in high-cost Germany could simply buy a vastly cheaper SIM card from Poland and use it in Germany permanently, destroying the German domestic market. To prevent this, the EU introduced the fair use policy. Operators are allowed to check if you spend more time abroad than at home over a 4-month period. If you do, they can send you a polite warning, followed by small surcharges. Furthermore, the EU had to regulate that wholesale market we talked about earlier. They capped the wholesale prices operators could charge each other, ensuring that no telecom company would go bankrupt simply because their customers traveled. It was a masterclass in market regulation. By fixing the invisible wholesale market, the EU was able to mandate a perfectly seamless retail experience for the consumer. It is one of the greatest triumphs of Brussels bureaucracy. Data consumption abroad skyrocketed by over 500% almost immediately. Citizens could finally use navigation apps, translate menus, and video call their families without the lingering dread of impending financial ruin. The original regulation was set to expire in 2022. But because giving people free things and then taking them away is generally considered bad politics, the European Parliament extended Rome like at home for another 10 years. The new extension also mandated that consumers must have the same quality of service abroad as they do at home. If you pay for 5G speed in Helsinki, they cannot intentionally throttle you down to 3G when you arrive in Madrid. It is a rare, pristine example of the European Union working exactly as it should, identifying a problem that individual countries could not solve alone and using its massive regulatory weight to force the market to behave itself. So the next time you cross a border in Europe, wait for that little text message from your operator welcoming you to a new country. Notice how it does not demand your firstborn child in exchange for data. You can thank a few thousand pedantic bureaucrats in Brussels for that small miracle. I would call to congratulate them personally, but my lecture time is up and I never exceed my fair use limit. Class dismissed.